Okay, in this video we are going to finish the armhole seam of this tank top with the binding, just as we did the neck in the last video. So the way this works is, like I said, the same concept. You take your sewing pattern, you're going to measure the distance around the front and the back armhole without seam allowance, and then take that number, multiply it times 20%. So my number was 26.5 times 0.80 to give me the 20% of that number is 21.2. So that's what I have my strip cut at here. It's 21 inches long. So the first thing I'm going to do is take it and sew these short ends with the right sides together. There's one. This is the second one. And with knits, I don't know if you know this, but a little tip, when you pull it, stretch a knit, it always curls to the right side. So you can always tell which is the right side of the fabric. Okay, so here's my strip. Now I'm going to fold it and pin the raw edges together in a couple of spots. I'm just going to do the spot where the seam is and then halfway around for the armhole. The only two spots that it really has to line up is where the underarm seam is and the shoulder seam. So that's our concern with the armhole. Okay. Here we go. So now we're going to apply this to the shirt with the right side out. I'm going to start at the armhole and put my strip, match up the seam of the bias strip or the binding strip with the seam of the side seam of the top, and then the other end will get matched to the shoulder. Make sure it's not twisted. Pin it together. Just in those two places. It's better if you don't, fewer pins actually work better for this because you're stretching it. You just need to get a feel for the fabric and how much it's going to stretch. Okay, so now we're going to sew it. Once again, we are going to be sewing kind of blind here, so you want to pull the shirt up, the raw edge of the shirt, even with the raw edges of the binding. But you have to stretch the binding over the shirt as you work. So it takes a little bit of practice. You could, if you wanted to, maybe baste this on the sewing machine first with a long stitch to get it the right amount of stretch here to make that work. And some fabrics stretch more than others, so it just takes some practice to know how much you can do. Make sure you're stretching just the binding, not the actual armhole of the top, or it'll be too big and you'll have to take it in. There we go. only do a couple inches at a time with this because it needs to stretch a fair amount, and it's just hard to do all these things at once. I actually don't make a ton of t-shirts, but once in a while I do. Okay, so here we are at the top, and it's looking pretty good. I don't have too much of the shirt that's not matching up with the binding, so we're doing pretty well here. It's pretty evenly distributed over the armhole, so that's good. And be careful, of course, not to cut into your shirt. I've done that before. In fact, this top that I'm making has a slice in the back where I cut it in the serger by accident. So those things do happen, and you just stitch it up and don't worry about it. Okay, almost there. Dark fabric is hard to see. I apologize. I should have maybe chose a little bit lighter color, but here we go. And as you get close to the end, you have to really look at it and gauge, can I pull this binding enough to get it over this last bit of the shirt? And the answer is yes, I can, but I have to do it a little bit at a time. Okay, there we go. Well, one little spot I missed there, so I have to re-stitch that little spot. It does happen occasionally where you have one little bit that didn't work out the way you wanted it to. I had the same trouble on the neckline, and I just, two spots. I take that back. Two things to fix here. But other than that, I think it's going to work. This is the front of my shirt, so I'll just fix that little spot there. Otherwise, the binding is looking pretty good. And you give it a good press, and you should be all set to go.